We're all here today to celebrate Cath as she moves towards retirement. We have a lovely lineup. So we're going to start with Carl Taylor, who has been involved with CMIP, I think, since it started, and I think we called him yesterday the CMIP Oracle. So I will pass over to Carl first. Thank you.
Eleanor. Welcome, everyone. I'm allotted 5 minutes, and I could hardly begin to cover the considerable contributions Cath have made to climate science, her publications, her team management at the Hadley Center, her many contributions to the IPCC assessment reports, and of course, her leadership of international climate science activities. So I hope you will not think me remiss if I limit my remarks to the areas where I've had the privilege to work with Cath directly. I'll begin with a quick pictorial history of Cath's involvement in the WGCM and CMIP, and I'll end with a few slightly more personal reflections. So let me share my screen if I can here. Is that showing now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So I want to thank Jerry Meal, Ron Stauffer, and Veronica Ehring, along with Paul Dirac, for helping with the pictures that I've included here. And I'm just going to quickly go through kind of some meetings where we've interacted. Before the WGCM days, when Cath had time for contemplating and writing, she attended the IPCC TAR meeting in Auckland, and this just demonstrates that actual work was getting done there. But she also started hanging out with some of the CMIP crowd, probably done that before, but here's evidence of that, and also WGCM members who are also in this picture. It wasn't until 2009, however, that she formally joined the WGCM in a meeting Peter Gleckler organized in San Francisco at a beautiful location. A few years later, we met in Hamburg, and then Victoria, Canada the next year. And here she assumed a co-chair position with Sandrine Bonny at the meeting in Germany, where a lot of the CMIP 6 planning went on, and the CMIP panel met, and some work got done there. And we also did a little bit of sightseeing. It was another beautiful spot. The following year in Dubrovnik, there was kind of a retrospective meeting about CMIP 5. And the next year in Princeton, where Sandrine sort of said goodbye to, when Cath said goodbye to Sandrine Bonny, who was her co-chair originally, and Greg Flato assumed that position. And here they are chairing a meeting with everybody paying about as much attention as people do at the US Congress, I think. But in Barcelona, the CMIP panel also met, and here's our group. And by that time, we'd gotten to know each other pretty well, and I think it was a really tight-knit group. And so last year when she stepped down as both the WGCM chair and also the CMIP, as a CMIP panelist, to work on ESMO and other projects, to exaggerate just a little bit, it broke our hearts. And here's some remarks from Jerry, Ron, and Veronica that I'll let you read on your own. While I say a couple of words myself, the pictures I've shown attest, I think, to Cath's unceasing contributions to coordinated climate modeling activities. But what they fail to convey is the way that Cath went about influencing the outcome of CMIP. And I'll second Jerry's comment if you read that and say that she is that natural, caring, and positive attitude that makes everyone feel important and valued. When she voices a counter suggestion on how things might be done differently, she provides smart and sound arguments in support. And as a leader, a team player, and as a cheerleader, I think she has been one of the key individuals responsible for CMIP's scientific impact. And on a personal level, I've enjoyed all my interactions with Cath, from working out problematic issues to sharing meals and beers together. Much of CMIP's success is due to the unusually close relationships developed over the years on the CMIP panel, and the trust, respect, dedication, and deep caring attitude of those involved have made CMIP, for me, quite rewarding. And if I can stop sharing now and give you a look at my t-shirt. I think on a final note, I wish I could give Cath a t-shirt like this one I'm wearing that I think expresses the spirit of CMIP. I view Cath as one of the we, and I'm grateful for her contributions and her friendship. And with this, and with hopes that I've conveyed, perhaps in a small way, my appreciation for everything Cath has done, I now have the pleasure of formally introducing her as our seminar speaker. Cath, I look forward to hearing your perspective on the WCRP and on CMIP.
So much, Carl, for those so kind words. So thank you. I will try and share my slides now. Thank you. So yes, thank you so much, Carl. That was such a lovely introduction, and it's quite hard to then talk about what I wanted to talk about without feeling very emotional about it, but I will certainly try. I hope this isn't too much of an indulgence, but I wanted to just perhaps say a little bit about my perspectives on WCRP and how I got involved, and maybe think about CMIP and the future challenges going forward. Next slide, please. So what am I going to say? I think I'll say a little bit about how I got involved in intercomparison and WCRP, and the role that I think WCRP, particularly the groups I've been involved with, WGCM and ESMO, have for the modelling community. And Carl's already hinted at some of the things, I think, and some of the very positive attitude that the groups have, and the way that we all support and help each other. And I'll also try and say why I think CMIP is still important, and how it is moving forward, and how it can embrace some of the next challenges and what's next for model intercomparison. Next slide. Yeah. Oh dear. I hope you can see that. But this really talks to the very first pieces of work I did, which were really intercomparisons of cloud feedbacks. They were just work within the Met Office. But my first boss, John Mitchell, and he was really a mentor, very much a mentor to me, and through his engagement in WCRP, and IPCC was a lot of the reasons I got engaged. So one of the first pieces of work I did with him was to look at to implement a new cloud scheme in our model, and then to look at the effect that had on the climate sensitivity, and ended up producing 4 different versions of that scheme that we looked at in detail and saw how the clouds were in particular impacting on climate change. And that led me to think about intercomparison and how that might be playing out in other people's models. And I met up with 2 quite young scientists at the time, so Sandrine Boney at PSL and Christian Jacob, who was at that time at ESMWF, who were thinking and doing similar things. And we managed to get together and run an EU project, a pretty small EU project, quite focused, to look at the mechanisms of cloud feedbacks within our 3 models. And we shared data and produced some really nice papers. Mark Webb joined us at an early stage of that, and here are some of the papers that came out of that work. And of course, Sandrine's seminal work, if you like, on the understanding of dynamic and thermodynamic drivers of cloud feedbacks. So of course, both Sandrine and Christian have later gone on to be also luminaries in WCRP, and very much fantastic role models for me as well, working with them. Next slide. So at the same time, I was also obviously the sort of the science of climate change was really taking off. This was in the sort of early 90s. And I was at the Hadley Centre. We were very much involved in trying to run models to produce simulations that might be used for our UK government involvement in things like the Conference of the Parties. And I was lucky enough to go to the first COP in Berlin, and that's a very young Angela Merkel there, who was involved in the discussions at the time. And then also to COP3 in Kyoto, and that's a picture of me and Peter Stott, for those of you who know Peter at the Hadley Centre, standing by our stand, showing projections from our model, our HADCM3 model at the time. And that was one of the first models that was really able to capture the historic temperature trends, partly, of course, because we're including greenhouse gases, but also aerosols, and we were doing, you know, quasi realistic scenarios in that model, but also not least because that model was one of the first that actually captured the heat transports, because the ocean resolution was getting to a reasonable level, and so it was a model that was able to run without flux adjustments, for example. So we were, you know, presenting this and talking to many people about the impacts of climate change, but people who were pretty uneducated about that at the time. And I think it was, again, an introduction to others who have been really involved in, you know, supporting climate science for supporting policy. Next slide. So then, you know, the other people who are involved, and you've already seen many of the pictures of like people like Jerry Meal and Ron Stufer, who were engaged in IPCC, and also, of course, WGCM. And these are pictures from the third assessment report meeting in Arusha in Tanzania. And again, Jerry and Ron, you know, helped me massively in this as a lead author in this report. I was pretty young, naive, but it was the most fantastic experience, attending all the various meetings. I was lucky enough to go to climb Kilimanjaro while I was in Tanzania, and also, of course, the third assessment report was the Nobel Prize winning report. So it was a superbly exciting time. But I remember Jerry also telling the story of how, you know, it became clear that many of the modelling centres weren't really interested or didn't run future scenarios, much more interested in sort of idealized experiments. And it became clear that somebody needed to kind of coordinate and pull together a much more, you know, well-designed set of experiments. And of course, CMIP was born from Jerry's ideas and others. And WGCM was the place that coordinated CMIP3, and that was for the first time, I think, when there was, you know, something like a set of core experiments, historical, PI control, 1%, but then also the SRES scenarios, and actually a lot of modelling centres starting to actually run those scenarios that were going to be used for IPCC. Next slide. So as you've seen from Carl, and I have many of the same pictures, that led me to being able to join WGCM when John Mitchell stepped down in 2009. And I think I found my spiritual home. It was absolutely fantastic. Firstly, co-chairing it with Sandrine for a number of years, and then, of course, also with Greg. And both were just fantastic co-chairs, and, you know, helped me so much in everything that we did. And have done, and, you know, we have attended many places and had many meetings, but also done a lot of work, as Carl said, sort of, you know, particularly in the period that I was involved planning for CMIP 6, but also, you know, many workshops on analysis and seeing all the excellent science that the community have done with the CMIP data, model hierarchies, and etc., right up to the start of planning for CMIP 7 in Hamburg last year. Next slide. So also, of course, WCRP has evolved. And when we first started, there were really the 4 core projects, which were the heart, if you like, of WCRP. And other things like the modelling groups were satellites around these. And I think as WCRP has evolved, it's been great to see the elevation of the modelling and the observational capability to a core project in the new Earth System and Modelling Observations project. I think that's the right thing for that to do, to recognise the standing and influence of CMIP in particular under WGCM for supporting climate action and really bringing it to the fore, and also, of course, as a home for the wider modelling communities. And again, I would reflect that I think WGCM and all the modelling working groups in WCRP WCRP in general is inclusive and as a home for everybody. Doesn't matter how many simulations your model can run, you can engage through WCRP. Next slide, please. And of course, CMIP has evolved. So from those early beginnings of a coordinated set of model experiments, Carl, absolutely one of the gurus of CMIP, but also, of course, Veronica, have just done fantastic work in CMIP 5. So when we introduced near-term predictions, a sort of idea of core projects, and really importantly, the supporting infrastructure that allows both the modelling centres to contribute to CMIP, but also, of course, the climate science community to access all of that data and download, and the thousands of papers that have come out is just testament to their planning and their thinking. And for CMIP 6, Veronica and that same small group of people that Carl showed you a picture of really tried to coordinate a huge set of experiments. So we had this idea of a continuous deck where models could run these sort of core experiments at any time and contribute to them, but then punctuated along that line would be occasional bigger efforts like the CMIP 6 or the CMIP 7 efforts, where we coordinated a much larger sort of set of model intercomparisons, but these would be distributed across the community. And very importantly, for CMIP 6, we also started the so-called WIP, the WGCM infrastructure project, which actually a panel which really formalized a lot of the infrastructure work, all of the support for the ESGF, for example, and all the data requests and many other pieces of work which are perhaps in the background but are absolutely essential to support the community in all of this work. Next slide, please. So I don't think I need to tell you how important CMIP has been for policy. I mean, you can just open any IPCC report and look at many of the statements that are all underpinned by the projections, the model projections. So actually providing the evidence for human influence, producing patterns of climate response, understanding the forcings, thinking about the TCRE and how we can what the carbon budgets left are, etc., etc. So it's been hugely important and influential on the policy stage. Next slide. But equally, I would say important on the scientific stage. It was designed obviously originally as a scientific multi-model intercomparison. And I could pick many pictures from all of the different MIPs, but of course the one that's perhaps closest to my heart is cloud feedback, CFMIP. And this is a picture actually using the information from the WCRP assessment of climate sensitivity, which brought in multiple lines of evidence, the Sherwood-Webb paper. So not just models, but trying to constrain climate sensitivity. But really, in order to bring that, to utilize that and understand it, we need the models to understand what's happening at a process level. And this is a really nice paper by Mark Zelinka, which took the CMIP 6 models and looked at the range of cloud feedbacks and how that played out in terms of the changes in different cloud components. And it made me think back to my original Senior and Mitchell paper in '93, where I tried to do something quite similar in my very small model intercomparison. And you can't compare this picture directly, it's flipped round, so it's 90 north to 90 south rather than the other way, but actually it's not that different if you do the comparison. So that we've learned a huge amount about cloud feedbacks from intercomparison, but there's still a lot to understand, and particularly at this process level, it'd be great if we can utilize the observations and our understanding to really constrain things at a process level. So I think there's more to do. Next slide. And the other thing I think that we've moved forward on is embracing higher resolution simulations. And so one of the big advents in CMIP 6, I think, was high-res MIP. So this is a recognition, of course, that the typical CMIP model resolution of 100 kilometers or so really misses a lot of key processes that we know are important for future climate projections. And this is a picture of the ocean eddies that you can see in a very high resolution model on the right compared to the lower resolution models, and the importance here just in the terms of the separation of the Gulf Stream, but in many of different aspects We know that these are important and they can give us a very different outcomes for our future projections. And on the right, you can see that in terms of SST trends, we can now look at sort of ensembles of high resolution data. So the bottom plot is an ensemble from some of the world leading CESM ensemble that's been run at these high resolutions, plus some of the high-res MIP models. And you can see that it really captures these trends much better compared to the observations than the low resolution models. And there are many other pictures of this type. So high-res MIP has been really revolutionary, I think, in enabling a wider group of modeling centers to contribute, those who don't necessarily run all of the kind of very long multi-century simulations. And are able to run perhaps some of these rather shorter experimental designs that were used for high-res MIP and giving us new insights. And we're in the process of updating that for CMIP 7. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. Next slide. So, but what about the kilometer scale models? I've also been involved in running kilometer scale models, and the animation on the right, sorry, on the left, if you can see it, is from a piece of work I did with a large domain regional model over Africa. What you can see within this is that within the domain, these sorts of models are able to develop their own kind of meteorology, and you start to see things like organized mesoscale convection happening in the domain, and this really has a massive impact on the precipitation, for example, profiles. And the pictures on the right of that animation show that the PDF of rainfall is much better captured at these high resolution models. So you start to capture the extreme trends in the rainfall, and that plays through into the future projections. We were able to do a simulation for the future, and on the bottom picture you're looking at the difference in the future rainfall PDF in red from the high resolution model, and you see that there's a much larger increase in the extremes than there is in the blue line, the lower resolution model. So I think there's really strong evidence for the need for kilometer scale models. And of course, there are many projects now thinking about global storm resolving models and how we use those. And I'm hugely supportive of this. But I think that we have still got work to do to prove that we need the global scale rather than just using these kind of limited area scale. So we need to think and talk about how we can prove the need for or how the upscale processes are impacting on the larger scales. And you can see on the bottom right that, for the typical CMIP models, as we've gone through the different CMIPs, the ability to capture or to improve the systematic biases in precipitation has been pretty limited. But I'm also conscious, and there's a nice picture at the bottom here from Ben Sanderson, that of course with these kilometer scale models we are limited in how long we can run them, or how many modeling centers can really run these, because of the high computational expense. But for CMIP, for many of the science questions that we have for CMIP, we need to represent uncertainties. And so this really, I think, plays into the need for a multi-model hierarchy across, ranging from single column models through EMIX to full Earth system models and up to the kilometer scale. Next slide, please. So high-res MIP2 is thinking about the need for this, and perhaps acting as a bridge between CMIP and kilometer scale. And this is a picture from Malcolm Robertson and Michael Lai at the Met Office, but I'm hugely supportive of this kind of idea that we can identify a relatively short experiment, something like a global simulation, choosing a year where we have really good observations, with a perhaps rather looser protocol than we are traditionally used in CMIP, as a kind of benchmark for models running across these different space scales, making a good link to good observational periods like 2020, and maybe rather than a MIP, a sort of PIP, a process intercomparison project where we identify those so we can sort of cope with this somewhat looser protocol. And we hope that this provides some sort of common ground for CMIP and these kilometer scale models, and the very many projects like EVE and Diamond that are actively taking this forward, and also potentially as a training ground for AI and machine learned models as well. Next slide, please. So as we go forward for CMIP, I have absolutely faith and great hope in the new team leading it. So John and Helene and Eleanor and all the many people involved in the task teams, etc. I think there's already been a huge amount of thought gone into the experimental design. And I think the idea of the fast track and the community MIPs coming on is really excellent. And I think, you know, they've really captured the many science questions and policy questions that we will have to be addressing. There's also, of course, a lot of thought around some of these ideas that have been coming out about the need for kind of operational timescale climate simulations. And I know that John and Helene have been thinking about a sustained mode that we might be able to support within CMIP, and embracing the full model hierarchy to address these different questions, as I've said. Again, continuing to engage the whole WCRP family, and of course supporting the science community, who are massively dependent on CMIP and are very keen to see a new set of scenarios and community MIP experiments. Next slide, please. So that's it. Hopefully that was a whistle stop tour and not too much of an indulgence of talking about what I've learned from this. I think CMIP remains crucially important. I think it's clear that it's over the years delivered policy relevant science and directly influenced climate action, but also really very much influenced the science thinking and the use of the multi-model ensemble has addressed many science questions. I think there's a continued and urgent need for new scenarios to support the net zero agenda, to understand climate interventions and many other things. And we can't wait for, you know, kilometre scale models to be able to be run at those resolutions. We need the model hierarchy to do this. And there's huge appetite in the science community for these experiments. And I think the CMIP 7 design is very good and clever, and I think it will embrace these challenges, things like the sustained mode and the bridging to kilometre scale. What will kilometre scale models deliver? I think they do deliver, and they, you know, it's been shown that they are there to improve projections of tropical precipitation and extremes at the very least. But we still need to articulate the evidence, I think, for the added value of the global kilometre scale at the process level. And there are many groups, including the Met Office, actively working on this. But also, of course, the vast amounts of data that we have in these models will lead us to new approaches to data handling and analysis, including the use of AI and machine learning. And of course, the models themselves will be a benchmark for training of AI and machine learning. So I really hope that we can embrace all of these different model capabilities, the idea of the kind of multiverse of modeling approaches, from, you know, right across the modeling spectrum, and also synthesize information from the kilometre scale models with the multi-model ensemble and AI and machine learning. And my final slide, please, Beth, is just to say an enormous thank you to everybody who I've engaged with. It's been an absolute blast. I think it's been just about my favorite thing to do, is working with all of you. And as Carl says, I think it's just so much about the positive attitude, working with people who you don't have to work with. They're there because of their desire to do the similar things that you're doing. And I would encourage anybody out there who might want to get involved in WCRP and the various panels. It's really the most fantastic thing you can do. And so thank you, everybody, for all of your support and your fantastic science. And I look forward to seeing what you're all going to do in the future. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks so much, Cath. I think if people stay on, we'll have the opportunity for a few questions, but it just fell to me to say a massive thank you to you for all the current and past people who've worked on CMIP, and indeed the whole community, I guess, who've benefited from CMIP. You know, it's been my privilege to work with you at the Met Office for 28 years. So I've seen not just the international side of CMIP, but also behind the scenes at the Modelling Centre, developing the models. And, you know, the number of participants who've joined this seminar, I think, is an absolute testimony to the esteem in which you're held internationally, Cath. So, you know, we're massively grateful. You know, and, you know, as in my time in the CMIP panel, we've definitely appreciated your words of wisdom as we've moved towards the fast track and as CMIP evolves, as you've talked about. And so, you know, your legacy and thoughts will continue. And I can always call you, Cath, for advice.
Yeah, absolutely, so, you can, Helene.
So anyway, so I'm sure on behalf of everybody, we just want to, you know, really recognise and celebrate everything that you've given to CMIP and the community, and say a massive thank you. And that then, if people want to stay on, I'm sure they can talk and ask you questions. So absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Helene. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Cath and Helene and Carl. That was brilliant. It was a bit sad almost, but it was great to see all those old photos as well. Does anyone have any questions for Cath before she swans off into her retirement as a lady of leisure? You pop up your hand or... No. Oh, Paul.
Just like to say thanks so much, Cath. It's always, to me, it's really interesting going, you know, being taken down a trip for memory lane, particularly when people have been involved in this for so long. And I had a question that you may want to just dodge, but I'm going to throw it out anyway, because I think it's really a good idea to try and gather wisdom from folks that have been doing this a long time. And so the question would be, the CMIP community has grown spectacularly over the life of the project, and the interest in the CMIP data is now, you know, basically a standard input to many things, not just research. So it's, you know, it's a huge project now, but that has all been very much dependent upon a lot of goodwill, really, and a lot of volunteer contributions, and a lot of people that really kind of see the benefit in CMIP, and then magically, you know, are able to, you know, use resources and funding that they've actually got within their institution and their funding agencies to magically make, you know, CMIP happen. And as we're starting to get towards climate services, there's this real need now to kind of do things that are far more applied than, you know, the somewhat kind of, you know, basic research that CMIP has been anchored on previously. And I think that's, you know, reflected in things like EVE and other kind of things that are really trying to target on getting useful information and really useful information down to the regional scale. So how do we navigate this, you know, this new need where, you know, agencies that have funded, you know, for the global good are now really starting to focus down on what we get out of the project and what, you know, what we need for our own regional needs, when the global is also something that we kind of need to do in parallel. Because to me, I think you've got to do the global before you can do the regional, but we've also got to make sure that we push back somewhat against, you know, this concertinaing of things down into just regional only.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, Paul, that you know, we can't, as you say, if people are only willing to pay for one or two things and they suddenly say, okay, I now only need the regional things, then how do you support the global infrastructure? And I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I think, you know, if we were starting again, the idea that you just wouldn't start from here is a kind of clear point. And I think we do need somehow to educate people in terms of what they are really getting from CMIP, and how do we, you almost have like a tax that all research pays for to support that, you know, within that. But how do you go from where we are now to that is a really difficult question. I think it is something that we are going to have to tackle. So, you know, good luck how that goes forward. But I wish I had a better answer.
Desi Davy, if you got a question, you've got your hand up.
Well, thank you very much, and I'd like to join other colleagues to congratulate Cath for your work with CMIP and all areas that you have been engaged to. My question is, first of all, I'm very happy you mentioned Arusha, Tanzania, where I come from. I come from Tanzania, and I was very happy to see you were here sometimes back in your engagement. And I'd like to pose this question to you. In terms of young scientists in the global south, I have seen we have less representation of scientists involved in CMIP in all these modeling platforms. What is your advice for the young scientists like myself in the global south? Of course, this.
Oh, I think he just cut off, but I think I got the absolute gist of the question, so I will try and answer.
For your base.
Okay, yes, I just missed the last bit there, but I think I got the gist of your question. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I totally hear what you're saying, and as a co-chair of WGCM, we recognize that as the world grew in terms of the modeling capability and new modeling centers were coming on stream from across the world, we really want to and need to include people because, as I've said, I think that involvement in the community of groups like WGCM is really a brilliant thing to share your experiences, to kind of feel like a supported community for all the modelers, and I think it's hugely valuable. So I really hope that we can expand our groups to include a much bigger representation from the global south and of course from early career researchers across the world, who I think will absolutely gain from that. I think there has been through the CMIP panel, for example, and all of the task teams that have been engaged, there is now a bigger group of people getting engaged, and we are spreading out the ability to join this and have an influence on many of these projects. We need to continue to do that and engage young scientists from all across the world, because I think WCRP is that inclusive and diverse set of people, and that's how we move forward, and we bring in all the ideas. So I would strongly encourage you to join the groups where possible, and for the groups also to make it possible for people to join.
Thanks very much. I think we've not got any more questions just now, and we're a bit over time. So thank you very much again, Cath. And what we'll do is we've been recording this, so it'll be uploaded onto YouTube, and we'll do a little news blog as well with the links to the slides, if that's okay.
That'll be brilliant. Thank you.
We'll send over all the comments to you, Cath, from the chat.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So do stay in touch, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thanks again.